Hi everyone, my name's Nat. Welcome to our Thursdays webinars. Every week we deliver engaging content aimed at neurodivergent individuals by neurodivergent individuals to help understand our brains better. But if you're not neurodivergent, you're still very welcome. We do a whole range of subjects. Today we are looking at the psychology of living with autism. What are some basic things like psychological principles and how do they relate to autism? Hopefully, a nice kind of one to either refresh the memory or to reintroduce you. Typically, as an organisation, we predominantly support dyslexia, dyspraxia, autism, and ADHD. I don't care about dyslexia, dyspraxia, or ADHD today. Today, it's autism. However, they all go together. So there are going to be some overlapping principles and ideas, but autism is the key one. I personally have autism. I think I was 3 when I was diagnosed, and I was initially diagnosed with high-functioning autism, which is no longer a thing. It's redundant. Forget about it. But I guess it meant that I didn't display autistic characteristics conventionally enough to have a classical autism diagnosis, and I was too dissimilar from the majority to not have any support at all. Nowadays, we just say Autism Spectrum Disorder, but obviously we've got people of all ages and backgrounds here today. So it goes by many different names. Here's me. For those of you who do not know, I've always mentioned I'm neurodivergent, got a master's in neuroscience, so you're in perfectly good hands. Literally, I'm going to be a TEDx speaker. I am bricking it, absolutely petrified, but it's going to be fine. What is talking into like 200 odds people? I will be sure to send you the video once it's done. Then I need to go get everyone to watch it. The psychology of living with autism. Essentially, what goes on in our brains? Why do we interpret the world differently to non-autistic individuals? It's worth knowing these are theories. We don't really know. Autism is complicated. Essentially, it is a lot of tiny gene mutations that are ridiculously common. It really is a needle in a haystack. Everyone is so unique. If successful, and we will be, we are going to looking at social and communication challenges, the bare necessities of autism. We're going to be looking at how we might identify autism by certain traits and characteristics and mannerisms. We're going to look at traits that might be shared with other conditions, as we said, the kind of comorbidity of autism. We're going to be looking at the classic theory of mind and what even is it and how does it relate to autism, really? And a little bit about late diagnosis. A lot to cover, but I'm sure we can hack it. First of all, what even is autism? Some of you may have heard of the Dyad of Impairments. Essentially, it's like the holy trinity of what makes autism. In 2013, it's like triad, whatever ad, let's go with a dyad. Dyad just means 2, triad means 3. Nowadays, autism, in a nutshell, in its most simplistic form, is to do with social communication difficulties and challenges and repetitive and sensory sensitivities. If you have these two, join them together, then you may have autism. Again, autism is a spectrum. It is very different for every single individual, but nearly every individual with autism will have a combination of these two. Repetitive behavior used to be separate, but I think they've decided it wasn't different enough. Here is the triad of impairment, in case you're wondering. It used to be split up with repetitive behavior, the social communication and social interaction separate. Honestly, it's the same thing. I think it just neatens it up. What they were saying is actually they're not too different. But on this one, I want you to tell me which of these is unique to autism. For instance, what is one that you couldn't get rid of? Leo, the DSM-5 oversimplifies autism. You're right. It's not great. It is widely used. That's why we talk about it. But I would recommend it. It does need a bit of a refresh. Autism needs social functioning challenges and language communication difficulties, either verbal or non. But the repetitive behavior part is optional. Not every autistic person has repetitive behavior, but all autistic people will have some sort of challenges in social functioning. I know what you're saying. Nat, why are you being such a Debbie Downer? Why is this so negative? That's just a medical model for you. That's just how they do things in the DSM. Personally, I like to look at the strengths, but that hasn't really reached the mainstream yet. What are the features of autism? We've talked about the key building blocks, about repetitive behavior, and sensory sensitivities and communication. But what are the more micro features of autism? When you think of autism, what is unique? What does someone with autism have that someone who doesn't have autism doesn't have? Just to wet the whistles, on the left, we've got some examples. And this is to demonstrate that when we break autism down to its most basic building blocks, such as the dyad of impairment, we are, as Leo said, oversimplifying things. What really is it? Again, it doesn't just have to be deficits. It can also be benefits and strengths. Caroline says ASD and ADHD coexist is so high that this has spawned its own label, or the ADHD. You are right, Caroline. However, that's still an unofficial term. They do go hand in hand, but they don't have to. I would say you could probably make up those sorts of labels for all of them, like autism and ADHD, dyslexia and dyspraxia. It is all genetically very similar. All right, features of autism. We have, I would say, unfortunately, I think there can be benefits to having both, but I will say the challenges of having multiple is that systems have a much less understanding on how they may support you. What are some of the key features? We've got struggling to transition. Yep. Laser focus, nuance, particularly with the difficulty of it, or maybe the need for particular details, realism, executive dysfunction, specific interests. Yeah, I can resonate with that. Extreme honesty, even to their detriment sometimes. Oh yeah, times my honesty has gotten me into hot water. Attention to detail. Other examples are sensory activities, restricted behaviors. We've got different honesty, dedication, intense focus, unique perspectives. I would say most people with autism will have at least some of these qualities. This is why I think when we break it down to just two things, we lose some of the unique features, particularly the strengths. The DSM doesn't talk about any of the strengths. Bob says, my memory recall can be rubbish too. Talking from the heart with one word flashcard. You know your subject and you are genuine. That's confidence. People relate whatever you say. Just be mindful at time and sidebar. Bob, I agree with you. When I talk from the heart, not a problem. But when I am forced to remember, my brain just doesn't work that way. Okay, we've got all perfectionism, need for routines, idealism, colourful brain, processing all information, overload, interested in real, deep and honest friendships. You know what? I like this, everyone. Why aren't we all creating the new diagnostic handbook? You'll see here that autism's complicated. It isn't just about negatives. It's not just about superpowers. It is a combination of highs and lows that differ from our neurotypical peers. I would say a lot of these, while some of them do overlap with other conditions, most of these, I think probably a lot of us who do resonate with being autistic can resonate with as well. If we go back to breaking autism down to its most basic functions, kind of social difficulties and language difficulties, I want you to tell me what ones are actually what. Slide left if this is a social difficulty, or slide right if it is a language difficulty. Yeah, LaDonna says they're not because neurotypicals often see difference as bad. I think when we actually look at what normal really means, it starts to get very blurry. Because normal is actually in the real minority. I personally don't think there is such a thing. But we do group normal enough together in order to create us the them. All right, let's see what we got. Eye gaze, social deficit. I would also say there's a lot to do with language in eyes as well, to be honest. Facial expression, social deficit, some sort. We've got posture and gesture. Yeah. Delayed language, definitely language. Sustaining conversation. Social, probably. Pretend play, social. It is a mixture, and I do think some of them can overlap, but they tend to fit into one category or another. The way ASD can manifest really depends on more factors than we'll ever have time for today. But it could be your classic communication difficulties. This isn't to say that your communication is wrong, but it's to saying that in your current environment, in the society that you were born up with, in the culture that you have been surrounded by, that there is a blockage between you being understood by your peer and your peer being able to understand you. Repetitive behavior typically means that the brain gets comfort in being able to repeat something time and time again. It has been said that the reason for this is because of sensory sensitivities. The world is smelly, noisy, there's a lot going on. And if we have some sort of consistency, it can pull us through the fog that is life. Co-occurrence, typically, to be honest, every single person I know who is autistic also has another condition. This is because these labels aren't ideal. We just use them in order to group a category of characteristics. But what happens if you're a mixture? We've said sensory sensitivities, which is essentially overload. Our brain is busy processing one thing, and then suddenly another thing comes along, and another thing. Think of it like a big conveyor belt, and you're trying to scan everything really fast. Then you've got challenges with empathy. Before we get into this, we will learn about theory of mind. I personally don't think those with autism struggle with empathy. I personally think it as a different form of empathy. In some instances, our empathy can be heightened, which can increase sensory overload. However, some people may say that's a hot take. Oh yeah, Donna, literally right on it. It has been determined that autistic people don't necessarily have issues with empathetics. It is more that double empathy problem, communication difficulties with neurotypical. Yes, and Caroline, we will be talking about that. Way ahead of me. Avoided eye contact. Yes, please all. It's not us, Bob. I would say a lot of the time, but it's just two different ways of communicating, isn't it? Some people see the big picture and then go down to the detail. Others see the detail and broaden out to the bigger picture. David says there's also a difference between cognitive and emotional empathy. Absolutely. It's like when people say, oh, you are just smart or you're dumb. Some people have street smarts. Other people have book smarts. Both are smart, but depending what kind of label we're applying to them and in what use cases. In academia, book smarts are probably going to be more beneficial, but in day-to-day life, probably street smarts is going to have higher benefit. I do think the same is with empathy. Depending on the circumstances you find yourself in, sometimes it may seem like a lack of empathy. In other times, it might be an abundance of empathy. We did mention that there is lots of overlaps. People like to simplify exactly where these deficits or these challenge or difficulties root from. But let's have a little bit look at how there may be overlap. First of all, we've got the social deficit of shares enjoyment. That could be that a lot of autistic individuals struggle or prefer not to engage with shared enjoyment. What this is saying is that maybe we prefer to have our own interests and maybe enjoy our own company. I think the origin of the word autism does actually come from being alone. However, on the communication difficulties, you may point to show interests. So you'll be much more directional on what you deem as important. The kind of stereotype of all autistic people like trains. We don't, by the way, but I will say I also do like trains. Interesting. It's been said that the reason for that is because we love order and routine, but detail. Trains are very orderly and detailed, but also have so much you can break down from it. That could be said for a lot of different areas though. Then we've got imaginative play with peers. Social difficulties, you may struggle in order to lose yourself in another person's world because you struggle to mind read. Mind read might sound a little bit sci-fi, but we kind of do mind read as humans. We are able to take an educated guess to how they are processing information and what their thoughts and feelings may be to any given situation. But when it comes to communication difficulties, imaginative play is more preferred. For instance, autistic people have amazing imagination. Their imaginations just typically do not align up with their neurotypical peers. Maybe it's because our imagination is too great, that it doesn't fit in with the kind of typical way of broadly imaginating. I would see that as a strength, but it's that we don't often apply it as a strength. And lastly, we've got interest in others. So one challenge that we can have is that, to be honest, other people bore us. If someone talks about a subject I am not interested in, honestly, I cannot fake it. Sorry to say this, but I do not like football. And when people talk about football over my head, I'm just not interested. But if there is an area I am interested, I am really engaged. and I'm able to truly immerse myself. You could see that as a negative. I see it as a positive because I am authentic rather than someone who, is a little bit two-faced and you don't know if they genuinely care or if they're just saying, oh yeah, I love that. With autistic people, you know where you stand. You can see with these deficits, the deficit comes from the situation or the environment, not because they are inherently a difficult downer. Or it says, or in the case of being specific who you want to hang out with. Yep, I agree. Autism, not in the ICD, which is predominantly the diagnostic manual we use in the UK, but in the DSM, the American version, they split autism down into levels. I don't like the levels. It makes me sound like a video game. You either have level 1 autism, level 2, or level 3. Rather than saying how severe autism is, a better way of approaching it is support level. How much support is required in order to navigate the world we live in? Some of us who have very substantial support needs will find these things more difficult, and those of us who have a lower required support need will find these easier. When we say autism is a spectrum, it just means the level it may affect you in day-to-day life. I would say in certain societies or culture, your autism may not even be seen as autism because our norms are individually defined by small pockets or groups of people. So could there be a level 0? I suppose level 0 is not having autism, because remember, autism at the end of the day is a diagnosis. You only get diagnosed if there is a problem. No one ever diagnoses you when it's all going great. You get diagnosed because there's a difficulty. But the key crux of this is that the difficulty isn't because there's inherently anything wrong with you, but society, because the way people treat us, and because adjustments haven't been made. That may not be fair. However, it still means there's difficulties. I try to look at these disorders with a slightly different lens. By saying you have autism and that you struggle, it doesn't diminish autistic people, but it's also acknowledging that life can be tough. Tom says difficult for who? Probably for both sides, to be honest, but I know where you're getting at with that. Bob says, what about high functioning? High functioning is a redundant term now. And the reason is that if I am high functioning, someone else is low functioning, and no one wants to be low functioning. Also, we don't fit neatly into boxes. You're not either always low needs, always high needs. It can fluctuate depending on life. Maybe you're really stressed. Maybe you're really overwhelmed. You might have very substantial needs. Maybe life's going smoothly. Maybe you're as cool as a cucumber in your safe space. You could have very low needs. You see how it can fluctuate. Donna says support needs vary depending on circumstances. Honestly, Donna, always ahead of the game there. With a different range of strengths and challenges. Absolutely. This is why I don't like the way of labeling people as level 1, level 2, level 3. But I would say, depending on life, it can change and vary. This brings us to theory of mind. A controversial, depending who you ask, theory on our understanding. It's important to know autism is a neurodevelopmental condition, and neurodevelopmental means it develops really early on in life. And as you get older, you do improve, or not improve, you do catch up with your peers to a certain extent. LaDonna says, I don't think I consistently fit in any of the levels. Honestly, I don't think anyone does. So here, theory of mind, if you've never heard of it, it's essentially the power of mind reading. Let's say you got the dad here, and he says, bring, 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 bring. Oh, hey, Tin, what are you doing? Tin's on the phone. He's a child. And he says, hey, I'm playing with this. Do you see the problem here? Because the dad is on the phone. He cannot see what little Timmy is doing. Timmy, he is only able to put his present self in his own mind. When we say he struggles with empathy, we are saying he is not able to put himself in his dad's brain. If he was able to do that, he'd say, oh yeah, Dad, I'm playing with my toy train. Because he knows that his dad is not able to see it. But he is essentially having empathy with his dad's perspective. But when you struggle with that empathy, You will just see, I see the train, so it's obvious that my dad would see the train. Theory of mind is something that you see a lot in autism, and particularly a lot in children. Those with autism, I would say typically on average developed slower. I know I sure did. I learned to speak, walk, talk, write. Everything in life, I took a lot longer to learn. It might mean that the way you learn it is slightly different. I'm curious to know if any of you have any opinions, thoughts on theory of mind, whether you agree, disagree, think it applies solely to autism or to others. Caroline says, I did that to my dad. My washing machine's not working, just listening to it. What's wrong with it? Yeah, I've done it too as well. It's just a different way of processing information, a different level of priority. Don't get me wrong, I think having a difficulty of theory of mind does lead to challenges. I'm not escaping that. But I don't think it necessarily is a negative. I think it's about communication. For instance, the dad maybe could have asked a more direct question, having stronger empathy towards his son, who he knows may not initially think to describe object that he is playing with. It can go both ways. Why does the emphasis purely have to be on Tim? Why can't the emphasis be on both individuals equally? Just a thought. Autism, we really don't know very much about it at all. It's okay to disagree, to argue, to share alternative points of view. David says, all such theories are generalizations which allow some insight/understanding, but it's always an artificial construct, though not 100% true. Nothing is ever 100% true. There's always an exception to the rule. I think the benefit of an autism diagnosis isn't to be the rule. It's about grouping shared experiences that happen to a large majority of individuals in order to give them a foundational level of support. If you are a teacher, knowing about theory of mind might help you communicate better with your students. There may be some students which this doesn't work for, but this is going to give you a fighting chance to bridge that communication gap more effectively. What's in the box, everyone? Looking at this, I want you to type, what is in this box? I wonder. David says it's a social construct. That's why, in my opinion, deficits do make sense for a diagnosis. The NT majority is the baseline. You're absolutely right on that, David. All right, everyone, what is in this box? Let us know. I know what I think's in the box. I wonder if you think what's in the box is also in the box. Maybe you could already see where I'm going with this. The correct answer is pencils. What have you actually got it right? How the hell did you get that right? Oh, okay, April, you've seen this before. But everyone else, Smarties, candy, chocolate. Why would you think that? Why would you think Smarties was in the Smartie box? Theory of mind. You are essentially putting yourself in that box. So what is likely to be it? We do not know. Everything we do is a guess. It is a form of mind reading. Yes, that mind reading is based on prior experiences, but there's no guarantee. We look at a box that says Smarties, so we assume there must be Smarties in there. That is a very educated guess, but it is still an assumption. Unless we look in that box, we will never know. Ah, yes, David, is it a box? It's certainly a picture of a box. Very good. There's a famous painting of a pipe, and it says, this is not a pipe. Because it's not a pipe, it's a picture of a pipe. It means that depending how you observe things, there's a level of, I suppose you could call it empathy, where you do have to make some judgment calls in order to interpret someone's meaning. Oh, here is a picture of me, as you can't really see, but picture of me with a little brain hat. This isn't a picture. This isn't me. This is a picture of me. It's got nuances like that, which some people will see it as, oh, that's absolutely a box. Other people see it's a picture of a box. Other people will say, I don't know what's in the box. Others will say, definitely Smarties in the box. The false belief task demonstrates the ability to hold false beliefs. Even though we can think we know the answer or think we know someone's intention, it is absolutely possible to misunderstand or misinterpret. This applies so heavily. People assume that it should be obvious to us that we know what's in the box. We're not wrong. Those of you who didn't know what was in the box was absolutely correct. However, society kind of relies on the facts that there is an element of being able to fill in the gaps and hoping that you'd be right more often than not. Yeah, I feel tricked. I'm sorry, I betrayed you. Yes, David, the pass un pipe. This is not a pipe. This a video, Nat? Oh yeah, guess it could be. It's a stream. Caroline says someone scammed people on eBay, pictures of a Samsung phone. You get what's in the picture. It's the buyer's picture, and they thought they were being clever. I seen that as well. Okay, I've seen that where people will literally say, look, an Xbox for £2, and they just get the picture of it. That's your fault. Autistic people can leverage their traits to ask intrinsic questions to get to the root. You're right, Rupert. Our colleague Tim does a lot of audits for organizations where he does a deep dive into their culture, and they are ridiculously detailed. I would say his autistic traits make him a really good auditor because he will question things that other people won't even deem question. For instance, if you see a box that has Smarties on, most people would never ever question it. If you say what's in the box, someone may call you stupid. But you're not stupid. You're just more inquisitive. You're more detailed orientated. Autism doesn't exist. A selection of conditions do. That kind of selection of condition is what we call autism. I suppose autism as a kind of like a genetic gene, or like there's autism, doesn't exist. But autism as you've got these types of traits, we'll give that a name, does exist. April says, I brought a new laptop bag yesterday. While the photo in the Argos app showed the bag with red details, the bag has mint green details in real life. You would assume that it would be red. Doesn't mean it will be. Names are given to things. Things don't have names. I think that way of looking at it. Why is theory of mind relevant to autism or me, Wendy? It is relevant because it shows you that we can hold different beliefs to other people without it being wrong. Depending on the details we give someone can change their understanding or meaning. When Timmy was saying, I'm playing with this, he wasn't wrong. He wasn't lying. He was telling the truth. But what he wasn't doing is assuming that other people don't have the same information that you also have. Those with autism typically will leave bits of information out that neurotypical people are often expecting. Another way is the Sally Ann task, which is classic. Look, we've got Sally here. Sally, this is Sally's basket. Then you've got Anne here. This is Anne's box. Sally has a basket, Anne has a box. Sally puts her red ball in the basket. Anne is nicely observing. Sally goes out of the room and leaves Anne alone. Where will Sally look for her ball? Anne takes the ball out of the basket and puts it in the box. When Sally comes back, she wants to play with her ball. But where is she gonna be looking? Don't worry, Wendy. Hopefully this will make it clearer as we go along. Yeah, Caroline, doesn't Red Bull give you wings? Too literal. Some people might say false advertising. Again, it is assuming that neurotypical people will be able to split those apart. But those who take things more literal, which is a very useful skill set, in certain instances, will feel like, I don't have wings. All right, so I can see we've got both here. Sally, let's go back a slide. When she has put her ball in the basket, and now if it gets moved into a box, why would she ever think of looking in the box? Because her last memory, the last bit of information she has, was in the basket. We're not mind readers, for instance. Sally is not a mind reader. She wasn't there. An autistic person may assume that when she put the ball in the box, that of course Sally must know, because they find it difficult to separate their mind with someone else's mind. Or so the theory goes. This task, pointing to the basket, shows an understanding that Sally's belief differs from yours. You may think she would look in one area, but she may look in another area. Both are correct, depending on the perspective that you look at it. This relates to autism because our perspectives are often quite different from our neurotypical peers. Apparently, 80% of autistic children fail the false belief task, showing less activation in different brain areas, such as this area and this area. It's interesting, I think, really interesting, that a lot of autistic children find it very difficult to put themselves in other people's shoes. I think when people say autistic people have less empathy, that is what it is referring to. But when people hear autistic people lack empathy, we assume that they mean that we're cold, heartless serial killers. Not at all. I think it's more to do with people's understanding of what we refer to when we talk about empathy in this given instance. Also, remember, neurodevelopmental delay, this does change over time. Caroline says, if Sally has ADHD, she might look everywhere as she often misplaces things. I like that. Or Sally already believes Anna is a thief and she was attempting to entrapment. That might happen a bit later in life though, once she's an adult. As children, we tend to be a little bit more trusting. Oh, April says, because it looks like the words and pictures are the wrong way around, I think Sally will look in the basket. It's interesting, right, how we all have different answers. Donna says, I'm confused. Would Sally not look in the basket first? Sally would look in her basket first because that is where she left it. However, Anne would be shocked by that because when Sally is looking for her ball, Anne's, why aren't you looking in the box? I put it in the box. The theory of mind is more focused on Anne, on how she isn't understanding Sally's intent. It would be expected to assume that Sally would look in the basket, but Anne isn't necessarily going with that. It's how two different individuals have different understandings on what the reasonable action would be. Sally's reasonable action in her mind would be to look in the basket, where Anne's reasonable expectation would be that Sally would look in the box, where she put it in the box, without taking into consideration that Sally never saw that. Quite similar to on the phone. Rupert says, why dictate what is what in terms of language? Sally is clearly more visually potential and not under tyranny of linguistic social constructions. Wow, that's one way of putting it. Caroline's wondering why Anne moves the ball in the first place. My mum always goes on about putting things back where you found them. With me, I do personally struggle with this. For instance, I will put places, like I've got a little Sonic toy, right? I'll put it on my desk. My partner comes and moves it and tidies it away. I really struggle. I find it difficult to imagine it being anywhere else. Even if it might be just, say, on the shelf on top, I do not look there. Even though I'm an adult and eventually I can probably piece things together, this is still an area I struggle deeply with. This comes down to a little bit on psychological models of autism. For instance, you've got your genetics, then you've got your brain mechanisms, and then you've got your kind of underlining beliefs of the world. If you have deficits or difficulties or difference in any of these three areas, this is what autism can present itself as. For instance, having a difficulty with theory of mind, having differences in your limbic system, and having alternative genetics, autistic genetics, can lead into a difference in play and pretend, communication, and social interactions. You can see how autism ultimately is around psychology. It is what we perceive and how we view different interactions and how they differ from the norm. But they do not come from nowhere. It is a combination between environmental factors and genetic factors that kind of ultimately trickle down to what we know as autism. This is just differences. These are different characteristics and different challenges that an individual may have. But when they all come together, that is what we mean when we refer to autism. Donna says, I get very upset when things are moved around because why did they touch my stuff? Yep, you don't have that information. Being able to say, I can take a very educated guess to why they moved my things would calm you down and give you a sense of empathy. Maybe they didn't need to steal from you. Maybe they just thought they were doing you a favor. But if you struggle to grasp that initially, that can cause you distress and sadness. There was something wrong in the previous slide. The basket column had a box and the other way around. Oh, that's what April was on about. You are absolutely right, everyone. That's what you were on about, April. Sorry, I totally missed that. That's a me mistake. Honestly, that is autism right there. An attention to detail. Those without autism would probably just look at the overall message. I know what you're trying to get at here. Where those with autism would probably be very detailed orientated and be hung up on that. completely intentional here. And a great example of those with autism and those without. If you didn't pick up on that and you have autism, it doesn't mean you don't have autism. But remember how we can say it can affect people very differently. Yeah, Ruka thought it was a deliberate mistake. Honestly, I wish it was now. Let's apply theory of mind and social deficits. Let's ask a nice question. What is a friend? We are applying this theory to real life right now. And it has been said that autistic people typically struggle with friendship. Why do we struggle with friendship? I want you to write here what's your personal definition of a friend. A person with similar interests. Yeah, this does get deep. I think this is a good question because it shows you how everyone's understanding of a friend is different. What might count as a friendship to you may not necessarily count as a friendship to someone else. Mackenzie says, why are we still using deficits and person-first language even amongst ourselves? We are talking about psychological models today, and that is the language that they typically use for that. But I do appreciate what you're saying. A friend likes your company. Yep, hopefully. A friend can be trusted without doubt. Someone can look beyond cultural expectations. A person who cares. Okay, so we can see some overlapping things here. People with autism may struggle to see friendship as a deeper bond based on shared experiences and understanding others' perspectives. When we talk about being on the same page, having a similar theory of mind can make a great foundation for friendship. But when there's a misalignment, the other person stops being a friend and becomes the other. In many ways, this is why individuals from different cultures can sometimes struggle to become friends or may even go to war with each other because our basic principles just differ. For instance, socialist societies or capitalists, they are fundamentally very different, which can mean creating a sense of empathy can be really difficult. It's said that our world we live in, our social world, relies on the following things. We've got intention. In order to navigate the world we live in, you've got to know what people's are intentions. If they get in a car, their intention is probably to drive. If you are at school, your intention probably is to learn. If those intentions are not fully understood, chaos, anarchy. If people didn't have intentions when driving, there'd be crashes all the time. But what people don't realize is that intentions can differ between people. Unpredictable actions. We need to know that the world is unpredictable. And when we accept that, the world can go on. But if we need everything to be completely predictable, it doesn't work. Routines are needed in order to minimize these unpredictabilities. Interactions with family people are easier because we have that level of trust and understanding. All these things together essentially make the world we live in navigable and understandable. But you can see how those with autism would struggle with a lot of these things because the way we interpret things. Remember on the phone, why are you doing this, Tim? I'm playing with this. The intention should be that Tim should know that his dad isn't able to see. Unpredictable actions. The dad can only assume so many things, routines. If he is always asking this question, the son should have a routine on knowing how to respond. With family members, the dad ideally should have a better understanding of how his son communicates, who is able to adapt. As a basic example, the double empathy problem in a nutshell. Thanks, Mackenzie. Exactly. All right, and then we've got pronoun reversal. How we break words down in sentences can also depict the meaning. What I want you to do is, Maggie's mum is washing herself. Which one of these is the right one? Maggie's mum is washing herself. Those with autism can often confuse words like I and you, themselves, you, I. For instance, Maggie's mum, Maggie is the first word here. So you see Maggie is washing and mum is washing herself. Though the correct answer is the second one, you can see how, depending how you break language down, can mean that you get a very different answer. Metaphors are another great example of types of language that autistic people can struggle with. This is because there's a level of assumption that someone is understanding how you decode a message. If you take a metaphor very literal, it can be quite damaging. You are what you eat. I'm not going to eat carrots then because I don't want to become a carrot. That would be damning to someone who took it very literal. Oh, this is the road to hell. Oh my God, I don't want to go to hell. You can see how, while metaphors can be great for neurotypical people because it brings things to life, it adds another dimension. The road to hell, oh my God. But for someone who takes it very literal, which a lot of autistic people tend to do, this can be a recipe for disaster. For metaphor. Ludula says, I'm glad you mentioned that rehearsing allows us to know how to answer the phone question, Nat, because I was genuinely questioning if I'm autistic. Yeah, the thing is, we do adapt. It's more about what is our kind of natural response opposed to what is our learned response. This is why diagnosing autism in adults is so much more difficult, because we've got a whole life of exposure and adaptation to take into consideration. All language is a metaphor. All right, David, very deep, but also very true. Oh, let's also have a quick look at this one. Ironic statements. Those with autism can also struggle with irony. On here, I want you to select the most ironic statement. A fire station is on fire. If you take it at its base value, oh my God, there's a fire, let's do something. If you are able to see beyond the statement, you can see the funny side of things. A fire station, their job is to put out fires, so it's funny that it's on fire. A police station's being robbed. Okay, we should probably do something about that. But you can see the irony because, again, they probably shouldn't be getting robbed. It's statements like these, and the difficulty does come from the order we decipher information, whether or not we see it as the broad image first, which means we can normally see the gist, the joke, the overall message, or if we start with a detail, and if we start from there and go up. Autistic people are very detailed orientated, amazing in most instances, but can lead to confusion in others, such as with metaphors and ironic statements. That's a fun fact, April, about Fireman Sam and there being a fire. Then we've got areas that you may struggle in. All of these areas are things that autistic individuals typically struggle at. Lying is because that requires you to understand if someone believes that, then you may benefit from that, where autistic people take things quite face value. Understanding jokes, because that requires you to understand the other person's assumption of what they are likely to initially believe. Double bluffing, like poke back and forth. Sarcasm. Essentially, all of this needs double the amount of cognitive processing. And for those who are already processing more information than anyone else could ever imagine, your brain just isn't going to be doing it, or it's not going to be the initial response. It's why that someone may tell you a joke, like 10 minutes later, it can take a little bit of additional time. I believe the last question is Star Wars. For those of you who haven't seen Star Wars, I'm ruining the ending. I'm sorry. What is Luke's feelings on Vader's death? If you take things quite literal, Darth Vader is a bad guy. He is dying. So maybe you feel happy. Or Darth Vader is Luke's dad and he's dying. So maybe you feel sad. But if you have that double empathy and you are able to break it apart, you realize how it is really hard to tell. Because on one hand, he's evil. He killed a bunch of younglings. He has tried to destroy the entire universe. On the other hand, he's redeemed himself now. There is goodness in his heart. It's these emotions where there seems to be conflicting information, where you have to take an entire backstory into consideration in order to come up with an answer which is most likely correct. If I just ask you, how does it feel when someone's dad dies? You'll be sad. If I say, how does it feel when an evil person dies? Life isn't that simple. And this is why those without autism who are able to see the bigger picture much more clearly find emotional interpretation easier than those with autism who tend to home in on one area. Hard to tell, divided, perplexed. Nice answers. The takeaways from today, and I appreciate it's been touching the surface, but I hope you found it interesting, is that autism, at the end of the day, is social and communication challenges. The reason it has a name is that names give us a starting point to help people, but it's not a hard and fast rule. The way our social and communication challenges can differ is unlimitless. Inferior mind is struggling with understanding others' thoughts. That seems perfectly reasonable. It's that if we lack all the information, how can we possibly come up with a well-rounded understanding? Communication, difficulties with figurative language and sarcasm. Again, it makes a lot of assumptions that we all have the same understanding in order for it to successfully land. Increased psychological and social issues from having a late diagnosis, because the older you get, the more of the social norms that you learn and adapt to, and it can make it much harder to pull apart what is inherently how you process the world to how you have been conditioned to process the world. Psychology, understanding non-literal speech, metaphors, and irony is genuinely harder. Hopefully today, we've been able to help you understand some of the theories of why we struggle with things that we may struggle in. Workplace needs assessments. If you are autistic and in the UK, get in touch. We can offer support in the workplace, which can include mentoring and coaching. If you did enjoy today's session, do check out our YouTube channel. We've got lots of great content, which is always being updated by the wonderful April. Do sign up to that. If you want to get in contact, follow me on LinkedIn. So much information today. I really do appreciate all of you for attending. Thanks, Nat. This is a great seminar. It brought up a lot of great discussion. Good luck with your TED Talk. Yes, by the time I next see you all, I'll be a TEDx speaker alumni. Thank you, LaDonna. Brilliant. Thank you all for the lovely comments and feedbacks. Yeah, I'll see you very shortly. Have a good rest of your Thursday, everyone.